Hi, everyone. I'm Elaine Quijano. It's good to be with you. Thanks for joining us. President Biden says he has seen body camera footage of the fatal police shooting of Daunte Wright. The 20-year-old black man was killed Sunday just outside Minneapolis. Wright was pulled over for a traffic stop in Brooklyn Center, Minnesota. The police chief told reporters he believes the shooting was an accident. President Biden called video of the shooting, quote, fairly graphic and the situation tragic, but he refrained from assigning any blame. Protests broke out in the Minneapolis suburb last night. Crowds were dispersed with rubber bullets and tear gas after the National Guard was called in. The murder trial of former Minneapolis police officer Derek Chauvin is taking place just miles away. The president is calling for calm as demonstrations continue.
We do know that the anger, pain, and trauma that exists in the black community in that environment is real. It's serious and it's consequential, but it will not justify violence and or looting. And so the question is how we, in an orderly way, make clear that they get down to a full-blown investigation to determine what the facts are and what is likely to happen. In the meantime, we're calling for peace and calm. And we should listen to Daunte's mom, who is calling for peace and calm.
Meanwhile, Congress is returning to Washington this week. As lawmakers get back in session, the Biden administration is ramping up its sales pitch for a new infrastructure and jobs plan. President Biden and Vice President Harris met with a bipartisan group of lawmakers Monday. The president says his proposals for what he calls the American Jobs Plan are not set in stone, but he's sticking with his expansive view of what infrastructure should mean.
I'm prepared to negotiate as to how the extent of my infrastructure project, as well as how we pay for it. A lot of folks saying that the fact that we have millions of people not able to drink water because there's lead and it's coming through lead pipes. I think that's infrastructure. I think broadband is infrastructure. It's not just roads, bridges, highways, etc. So that's what we're going to talk about, and I'm confident everything's going to work out perfectly.
Nikole Killion, Catherine Lucey, and Natalie Jennings join me now. Nikole is a CBS News congressional correspondent. Catherine is a White House reporter for the Wall Street Journal. And Natalie is the editor of The Fix at The Washington Post. Welcome to you all. Nikole, let me begin with you. What did the lawmakers in that room at the White House take away from their meeting with the president? And where does that leave his American Jobs Plan proposal?
Well, we are starting to get a readout from lawmakers who were at that meeting. I just got off a call with Congressman Payne of New Jersey. He said that overall the president was very open and amenable to different ideas, but does at the end of the day feel very strongly that he wants to get something done. How it gets done, he seems open to compromise. At least that was the takeaway from Congressman Payne. But at the end of the day, he wants things to happen. And so that's why you heard him in that press avail talk about not just addressing things like roads and bridges, but also addressing things like broadband, addressing waterways. All of those things very important to the president. So while there does seem room for compromise, certainly one point that Congressman Payne raised is that, the president may be willing to give somewhat on the price tag, but not necessarily. He didn't get the impression that the president was willing to make a right turn, if you will, a detour, because we've had some Republicans, for instance, who have proposed a much smaller package in the billions of dollars. And so Congressman Payne didn't think that the president would go for something that low, but might be willing to come down on the price tag a little bit more. So that's just one perspective here. But clearly there's a long way to go before we see both sides kind of singing kumbaya over this infrastructure package. Republicans still feel that for the most part, this package is very much inflated. We heard Senator McConnell on the Senate floor today say that this is just a Trojan horse in his view, and that just only a small percentage of this package has to deal with infrastructure. And so that is a common theme that we are hearing from Republicans. Democrats, on the other hand, of course, continue to say that all of these upgrades are warranted and that this package does have to go beyond the traditional infrastructure packages that we've seen in the past that might strictly deal with roads and bridges.
And Natalie, Nikole mentions Republicans. President Biden says he'll reach out across the aisle for Republicans who want to lend their support, but it doesn't seem he's counting on it, is he?
Well, he has a pathway. He knows that for getting this path through reconciliation, he can do that. The Senate parliamentarian has ruled, but he seems to be insisting. Both he and the press secretary Jim Psaki today have insisted that he is open to negotiating. This is someone who really campaigned hard on saying that he could work across the aisle. Every president says that, but Joe Biden emphasized it, and we didn't see him prove that in the one big piece that we've seen his administration shepherd through so far. So now they're setting out at the outset of this new big push, and he seems to be wanting to really say, no, really, this time I mean it. I'm going to be open to negotiating with Republicans. We'll see how far he lets that go.
All right. On another topic here, Catherine, we heard President Biden speak about the latest police shooting in Minnesota. It comes as the White House says it's shelving the president's campaign promise for a National Police Oversight Commission. Why is that?
That's right. We did hear from them today. They've been talking about this. The White House is really saying that they think the best way to move forward on police reform on this issue is through trying to pass legislation. There's a piece of legislation called the George Floyd Policing Act in the House. And they say that they have consulted with civil rights leaders, with law enforcement, and that they've determined that for now that this is the best path forward. So they are turning their attention to that over creating a independent commission at the moment.
All right. Catherine, I want to ask you about a pair of immigration stories as well. The White House is naming Tucson, Arizona's police chief, a vocal critic of Trump immigration policies, to run U.S. Customs and Border Protection. At the same time, the U.S. struck a deal for Mexico, Honduras, and Guatemala to send an increase of police and military to their borders to prevent people from trying to travel to the U.S. Are these in conflict at all, as the Biden administration has been aiming for what they call more compassionate immigration policy?
I think what you're seeing is the administration taking a really broad and intense approach to this, which is really becoming sort of the biggest early challenge for the administration, is this surge of migrants at the border. So yes, the appointment of the new CBP director, he is known as a progressive police chief who has been sympathetic to the Biden approach, has been critical of Trump, has been critical of policies that he saw as sort of damaging trust between police and the community, or meaning that Latino residents don't want to report crimes. So he is seen as someone who's in keeping with that philosophy. But also the deal talked about today with these countries is part of a diplomatic effort that the president has been taking on as well. He's tasked the vice president with trying to work on diplomacy with these neighboring countries to try and deal with the surge. And you heard the press secretary talk about this today. She said that they are trying to make this journey more crossing the border more difficult. So they are trying to work at this from a number of angles as they really try and deal with this problem.
Meantime, Natalie, CBS News confirmed Washington Post reporting about the call between more than 100 corporate executives. Full disclosure, that includes Viacom CBS chief executive Bob Bakish, to discuss ways to show their opposition to voting restrictions being considered across the country. What do we know about their conversation, which we understand included a mention of Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell?
That's right. Well, it came just a few days after Mitch McConnell was warning corporations about getting involved in politics to the degree they did after the Georgia voting legislation passed. We know that There's been individual actions from a lot of companies, but this was a collective. This is a group, not just a small group, but a big group of business executives, sort of on the same page about how they send signals to the different states where this is happening. Because remember, Georgia's legislation is already passed, but many states across the country, some with big corporate hubs, Texas, for example, for a lot of these companies, are considering legislation. So they're talking about how they might act in terms of putting resources into places. These people control a lot of donations to politicians. So those are some of the things they talked about withholding on this. We saw two African-American men who were CEOs, or current and former CEOs, took a big role in the call. They had been on the front end of the corporate face of this opposition. They were participants. And we know some of these executives, at least one was calling in from Georgia at the time they were at the Masters golf tournament, still trying to sort out, exactly how these companies can act to get an outcome that is not like what they saw in Georgia.
We'll continue to watch that. Nikole, looking ahead this week, Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer says that Senator Hironos' hate crimes bill will get a vote. Remind us, what is in that bill and what are the prospects of it passing?
Well, we do expect some movement procedurally on this measure at some point this week. And then, of course, after that, that would determine the course as to when it might be taken up for a full vote on the Senate floor. But look, this is something that is a priority for the Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer. He made it clear this would be one of the first things they take up once they come back from break, which, of course, is today. So it is not only his priority, but that of Senate Democrats. And basically, the key thing that this bill would do if it passes is that it would establish a point person at the Department of Justice to expedite the review of any hate crimes related to the pandemic or spurred by the pandemic, if you will. It would also provide more support to state and local law enforcement to deal and investigate these particular hate crimes. And it would also try to mitigate racially discriminatory language surrounding the pandemic. So those are a couple of the bullet points as far as this bill. But of course, this is really designed to also address the surge in hate crimes that we have seen, particularly against members of the Asian American Pacific Islander community.
All right, Nikole Killion, Catherine Lucey, and Natalie Jennings, thank you all very much.